Hello there. Thanks for joining me. Whether you're watching it live or in virtual recorded format. Um, it's been a while, actually. I've been quite busy lately, I'm afraid, and there wasn't that much to tell you about. But one of the things that we have been writing about in HCB increasingly over the past year, really, and this is taken over from the focus on digitalisation that we had over the last couple of years, which is still there, of course, but decarbonisation and sustainability in broader terms has really come to the top of the agenda in the past few months. We spoke a lot about it at EPCA at the beginning of October, and last week, the week before now, I think, I was in on the fourth Med Hub Day put together by the Port of Tarragona and ChemMed over 2 days, just a portion of each day, fortunately, to talk about the situation in the Mediterranean and what ports, authorities, terminal operators and the chemical industry can do. It's an interesting couple of days, as it always is. But the most interesting presentation from my point of view, at least, came from Antonio Turiel, who's a senior researcher at Spain's, let me get this right, High Council for Scientific Research, who looked at the impending transformation of the energy market in the age of COVID-19. To a large extent, his discussion came down to what we're going to do about diesel. Now, I remember when I first moved to London back in the early 1980s, it was quite shocking, really, that all these gorgeous Georgian buildings and earlier buildings were blackened by soot. It wasn't, well, some of it was soot from coal fires, but a lot of it was from diesel exhaust, heavy goods vehicles, buses, and so on, churning out diesel in the confined streets of London town. While I was there, and I spent 30 odd years living in London, and over that period, a lot of these buildings got cleaned up, and it was worth doing it then because diesel engines had become a lot cleaner, particularly in terms of particulate matter. In fact, there was a period, quite a lengthy period, as I remember, when we were all urged to switch over to diesel propulsion for our private cars because of the better mileage performance compared to gasoline, the lower CO2 emissions compared to gasoline. And it's only really been in the last couple of years when NOx pollution in cities and the problems that cause have made diesel engines a bad thing. Antonio did give some details to show that, in fact, in London at least, diesel cars are not that big an element of NOx pollution. It tends to be things like heavy goods vehicles again, but also home heating. So I think diesel cars are unfairly maligned, particularly as I'm still running one. Anyway, the problem is, the problem's broader than this. As Antonio was saying, and a lot of it's to do with the oil market and what's happened, not just since the COVID pandemic hit and the oil price collapse that came along about the same time, was partly to do with COVID, but it was also partly to do with overproduction, particularly by Saudi Arabia and the other Middle East OPEC nations, to protect their market share, really, against Russia. But as he said, the seeds for the oil price collapse have been there for 7 years or more, and largely to do with the huge increase in crude oil production in North America. How you can have the world's largest oil importer turn into an exporter in the space of just a handful of years and not expect an upset in the oil market, well, it's bound to happen. What that has done is, especially during the COVID pandemic, when demand for a lot of transport fuels has slumped, particularly for kerosene for aviation, is highlight the fact that there's more oil available than there is appetite for at the moment. And with the EU and China in particular having committed themselves to quite aggressive decarbonisation targets, it looks very much like we're not going to get back to that point where there's a big demand for oil, which is probably just as well, because as Antonio pointed out, at current prices, it's just not profitable to explore and produce oil, and it's particularly not economic to produce shale oil through fracking. He suggested, in fact, that a lot of the companies involved in fracking in North America are extremely highly leveraged, and at sort of $50 a barrel prices even, they're losing money on every barrel, and he expects them to go to business soon. Now, that may be a good thing or a bad thing, but what it does mean is that the transport network, particularly for goods, and also, especially in Europe, for private transport, relies at the moment very much on diesel. And if we're not going to have the diesel available, as we don't at the moment, then where are we going to go? And this is the question about decarbonisation. How is it going to work? And a lot of people are scratching around trying to find the answer. Everybody I've heard speak about this has concluded that there is not going to be just one answer. It's going to be a combination of technologies, many of which are already available, although not necessarily tested at scale yet. And indeed, Antonio came up with, he looked at, anyway, at three alternatives. The first being natural gas. You can run trucks on natural gas. LNG is widely used, in fact, already in heavy goods vehicles, and there's been a big focus on that from the maritime sector as well. But it has a lot of disadvantages. Firstly, that if you're going to retrofit to run on LNG, it's a pricey business. You've got to have a new engine, for instance. Maybe the upstream, the reduction in upstream activity in the oil and gas business is going to mean that there isn't enough natural gas available. There's a lot of competition for it from power generation, from industrial users. And it's expensive to move over long distances, and not everywhere has got gas available. The second option is hydrogen, which Antonio said is the most interesting thing in Europe at the moment. And we've seen, in fact, HCB's reported on quite a lot of projects going on around the continent to generate hydrogen and to use that hydrogen in many ways, but to generate it sustainably, particularly through the use of wind power, to provide the electricity for electrolysis. It's got some great advantages. You know, the exhaust from burning hydrogen is just water, and a high energy density per kilo, although it's very low energy density per litre. Antonio did mention, in fact, that the ports are well placed with the hydrogen. They've got water, they've got plenty of water outside the harbour area. And if they can capture offshore wind power, they've got it all there, and they can play a big part in the supply chain. But there are technological issues, particularly the need for very high pressure tanks. And if you're using hydrogen in fuel cells, then you also need batteries, of course. And because it is so cold when liquefied, there are problems with embrittlement and frugacity. The third option he looked at was electricity, pure and simple, and which in certain transport sectors, for instance rail, has been widely used for a long time. And again, if you can ensure that the electricity you're using is renewable, then you are decarbonising quite aggressively. But again, there's the problem of batteries. So that means there's a low, limited autonomy for vehicles other than trains, I think, to make a great deal of use of electricity. Methanol he didn't mention. We've seen some projects in that area lately, and today I heard, in fact, that Waterfront Shipping has put in a new order for, I think it was up to 8 methanol-fueled methanol carriers. But as Antonio said, it went back to this idea that we've got a lot of the technologies available already, and some of them can make quite a good contribution already to lowering the carbon intensity of human activity. For instance, he mentioned the mixing of hydrogen with natural gas, which reduces the carbon section of the resulting burning. And it's quite easily available. There's also the idea of combining electrolysis and the generation of hydrogen with carbon dioxide captured from industrial activity. So I don't think we're any clearer on the silver bullet that might come along. In fact, I think it's clear that there is no single solution. But we will all have to play a part, and the logistics chain and the petrochemical industry and the oil and gas industry are all already moving in that direction. So hang on to your hats. It might be a bumpy ride, but it's for the next 30 years. So if you're still around in 30 years, it could be an interesting time. That's all I've got to say for today. Thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll see you next week with another thing to talk about, which may be regulatory. Anyway, we'll see. Stay safe. Take care. Bye for now.